Communications and Policy Committees for the Concord School District. Today is November 15th. Present with me this evening is member Cara Meeker and Pamela Walsh. My name is Bob Cotton. Also in attendance is Kathleen Murphy, Superintendent, and Karen Fisher-Anderson. Mr. Richards is not able to join us this evening. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Fisher-Anderson to take us through the agenda and various policies.
All right, thank you very much. So, Bob, mostly for your benefit, last week last committee meeting, we took a look at both of these policies and took a lot back. And so what I'd like to do, if I could, is just kind of paraphrase for you and for the group that's here what we've done since our last meeting. Kathleen had the opportunity. I did make a bunch of changes to the policy in light of some of the comments. We tried a tiered approach. We tried a bunch of other things. And Kathleen took it to the principals yesterday, and the principals said, no, we don't like it. We want one form. And we want to be able to put the trips down on the form at the beginning of the year to send them to parents, and to then also put a provision in the little field trip thing that also gives the parents a heads up that they may be going out for walks, because I had even talked about excursions, walking excursions, and that parents will be notified via Parent Square prior to any field trips, but they would sign the one form that would have the anticipated trips for the year at the beginning of the year. Okay. One of the things we talked about last time was this annual registration when the kids are re-registered each year. Mm-hmm. There is a permission form portion of that, but and so the thought was, well, if they're signing that, why do they have to sign individual forms? We talked about that. Not everybody has a computer and has access or registers their kids that way, or even if they do have access and a computer, they don't always register anyway. So we took a look at that, and one of the decisions that we had to make that Kathleen made was, well, do we just pull that part of the form, the annual form, take the permission slip part out? And that decision was yes. So that part is going to be removed from the registration form, so that we're only going to deal with each school with their individual trips at the beginning of each year, which puts the onus on them, and they know that, but they said they were willing to list the trips. There may be an occasional pop-up if something changes and something really good comes along. They may have to send out one additional form to the parents to get their consent. Right. But the decision by the principals was, make it easier for us, please. One form, we'll put it all on one. We'll talk about the ability to go for walks, and if parents do not want their kids on a nice sunny day, or if something is like they drained White Park recently, so the high school was over there at the park. If the parents don't want their kids leaving the school grounds as an excursion, it's not necessarily a field trip, but to leave the grounds, they have to opt out and just say, no, I don't want my child to participate, and then arrangements will be made to leave that student behind. So that was one of the changes that came about. Let's see. There was a debate about the school trip approval form. We're not going to make that part of the policy. It is referred to in the policy. It is a standardized form that every school, so that they all provide the same information when they apply to go on a field trip, but we're not going to make it an appendix. It's just a school form, and so they can use that within each of their schoolhouses. And along with that is a field trip checklist, which is a lot of the logistics that have to be planned in advance. So one of the things, as I said, we talked about was, should we include that as an addendum? And the decision was, no, let's leave that out, make it separate, more at the school level. There was a discussion about written permission because the policy clearly says that that not only do they have to, the field trips have to be approved by the principal, but no child may leave school grounds on a field trip unless some form of written permission has been granted. Last week, we only had written permission, and we talked about that and thought it was very limiting. So we also talked about maybe texts or emails, a form so that we have written consent in case something happens and a parent says, I didn't know my student was leaving school grounds. That's why we extended that to some form of written permission. We made the language gender neutral. Instead of he, his, or his, her, we put their. You'll see words that are crossed out. For example, I changed it to Concord School Board to make it more direct and got rid of the. So anything in red is the new word, and anything crossed out in black was there. And then at the very end, you'll see that we eliminated in the second to the last sentence, which would be the third paragraph, since the board no longer considers funding district field trips, we went ahead and removed that since it really isn't tailored to what goes on in the district. So those are kind of the changes we talked about, and so this is the latest addition for your discussion and action as appropriate.
I think one thing that I thought was good that we talked about that it seems like we've lost is that parents shall be notified in advance if students are leaving.
They will be. They'll get the parent square.
Yeah, but that doesn't appear to be in here
Right.
anymore.
It's not gonna. It wasn't. I don't think it was in the last one as far as parent square. We just.
No, but there was a requirement that parents be notified.
Oh, they will be by parent square. But Kathleen, did you
But
want to?
should that be in the policy?
I don't know if it needs to be in the
Okay.
policy. I mean, I think that from what the principals told me yesterday when we reviewed it again with them, they always in their weekly messages or their messages home, let parents know that there's a field trip coming up, so we didn't think we needed to put it in the policy. I think this helps them get grade levels, determine what trips they're gonna take in a year, let the parents know. And then if they don't get a form back, as one of the principals said, we're not chasing everybody, we're just chasing those few kids that didn't get the form back in. And it was particularly important to, especially the little ones, Millbrook, where they forget and they don't remember.
Oh, the forms don't come home.
Yeah, and so,
Or they go home and then they don't get it back to the teacher.
Principal Scapati said, you know what, this is a lot easier for me, because they do, they chase until they get it, they don't want anyone not to be able to go.
So,
Did you know that I still sign off on overnights? I get those, like we have, matter of fact, the hockey team is going overnight, they have 3 games playing in Vermont, and so I get permissions overnights from them and approve them. The rock climbing club, they do a lot of outdoor adventure, outdoor activities, and they have some overnights where they camp out, so
So the process is at the beginning of the year, those field trips might be signed off on by the parents, but then the additional step is taken to request permission from you.
if it's an overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if
So-
the high school sends, hold on a minute.
Mhm.
I don't think the high school sends out a list of field trips for the year early in the year.
None of them do.
Nobody sends out a list of field trips.
Right,
That I'm
we
aware of.
haven't asked.
Krista McCullough, I think, is the only
Mhm.
one.
No.
No. I saw her form for this year. I don't know if she didn't send it
What
out.
we're trying to do is
Yeah.
get everybody to send out anticipated lists for the year.
Mhm.
The high school, Cara has not done anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Them being older, I think they take
Yeah.
some liberties, right? But with the K-8s, pre-K 8s, it's a little bit more structured.
so I apologize that I wasn't here the last time, but one thing that I wonder about, and that Karen just mentioned, is my question is, how do we define field trips? Because, to your point, let's take a walk down to White's Park.
Yep.
Somebody gets hit on the street, walking down to White's Park.
Yeah.
Are they on a field trip?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit too. We talked last time about walkabouts, letting the kids go out for what do they call motion walks, or give them a
Motion
break, motion break, get them outside. A walk doesn't necessarily have an educational purpose. A field trip does. Enhance, broaden, reinforce academic instruction which takes place in the classroom. So they're looking at something that's related to the curriculum.
I'm just thinking about liability.
Oh,
frankly.
so was I. So was I.
Frankly, I mean,
Yeah.
if a teacher's leading a bunch of kids down to White's Park
Yep.
and somebody gets hit,
That would be noticed though. They would let the parent know the kids are going. We're not just pulling them out.
they would let the,
They would let the parents know that the
Really?
students.
I got a notice today that they were doing a walk to look at colonial architecture for their colonial
okay,
unit.
I just,
No,
And I mean, it's a valid question because if we're requiring a policy for leaving school grounds, but this policy doesn't cover this instance of leaving school
I mean, it
grounds.
just doesn't explain what a field trip is. I mean,
Yes.
there's no definition of field trip. And it may be hard to define. But if nothing else, maybe we talk about walkabouts as being agreed to, although not listed. I don't know. I'm just thinking of the liability of the school district for people taking,
so it says they can't
Kids.
leave school grounds
Okay.
unless, so it says no.
On a
child-
field trip.
On a field trip.
So maybe it should be no child may leave school grounds unless
but
some
I mean,
form of
you know,
written permission
another
has been
example,
granted.
you're at broken ground, you could decide to take your kids on a science walk out in the,
Yeah,
in the-
we-
on the
we
trails.
talked- We talked about that, yeah, which is off school ground, school district land, but it's off, depending on how far they go. But if we changed it to say no child may leave school grounds unless some form of permission has been granted, will that?
That's what we have, no child may.
No, it says
No,
on
he
a
says
On a-
field
on a
trip.
field trip.
It does say it, on a field
And
trip.
then
I see
field
field
trip
trip, yeah.
defines very specifically,
And then but it does say written permission, and
Well,
I
that's
think
the
part of the-
problem. I mean, part of the
Yep.
problem is, the third grade teacher wants to take her kids out to see the leaves in the woods,
Mm-hmm.
broken ground, and somebody trips over a,
and so that's what we were talking about, the annual, like the beginning of the year, you would get a form to sign that would describe, students may leave to broken
okay,
ground to go into.
but it's not a field trip, is all I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's
no,
a-
and that's why.
So it needs to be listed then as occasional walks in the woods,
which would be in the initial letter from the schools home to the parents at the beginning of the year. The field trips they know they're going on for educational purposes, and then occasional, whether they want to call them walkabouts, excursions, motion, whatever, which they would give prior permission, prior notice of, but the parents would have to specifically opt out, because we talked about,
Yeah, that's, I don't mind the opt-out.
Yeah.
I'm just,
Just add that to the field trip and walking excursions. No child may leave school grounds on a field trip or walking excursion unless some form of written permission has been granted. Just add the walking excursion because it happens all the time.
sure it does.
And
Sure it does.
do we
Yeah.
mean that permission must be granted? Like, is the notification of colonial architecture walkabout require each parent to then verify back that?
Well, I signed a permission slip in the beginning of the
Right.
year for field trips.
But if we are
We would
removing
add
that,
to the list.
okay.
That's the key, making sure that they address White Park, White Farm, they take the kids over there.
Sure.
They walk the paths out at broken ground. Yours, at Crystal McCall, if they walk on the sidewalk, because there's no, and that's public property, so there's no place on the, really, to do walking excursion.
They walk
So
around
they
the
go
neighborhood occasionally.
down to that other play area, the PE teacher will take them down there. Ronald takes the kids over to Memorial Field sometimes, so.
Yeah, I just want to make it expansive enough that frankly, the school districts covered it.
Experience, right? It's part of our, and I know we have to be careful about liability. You're
Well,
absolutely
and it's just that when we're talking only about leaving school grounds, it doesn't take very far to get off school grounds. you know.
So no child may leave school grounds on a field trip or a walking excursion? Is that,
Are you okay with that?
Well,
unless
I-
some form of,
I'm happy if at the beginning of the year, walking excursions are part of the list of things that
yeah.
parents approve.
Yep.
Okay? I mean, that's my concern.
Do you want to change the title to field trips and walking excursions? Or
No,
just?
I think what we're trying to do here is we're trying to address field trips.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think we're all acknowledging that there are several types of small excursions that happen that aren't necessarily meeting the definition of field trips as it pertains to this policy.
Right.
So if we're going to separate the two, we just need to make clear that this policy is about field trips. And then I think we're sort of saying that we're in agreement that we're gonna trust the administration to develop this list at the beginning of a year that is not set in policy, which is another part of the conversation I think we need to have, which is that, you know, if we're not gonna write that down anywhere and say this must be done, are we okay with that? With saying, like, we know principals at the beginning of the year with their teachers are gonna come up with a list of potential excursions that parents will sign off on a physical form, period. And we just expect that to happen. In addition, we also have a policy about the process by which we allow children to attend field trips specifically. And so I think as a committee, we have to decide, do we want both of those in the policy? Do we want them separate? Do we need to address a policy specifically for excursions, or is it good as it is?
I think we can include it in here.
Mhm.
I don't care whether we change the title.
Okay.
But again, my concern is, once they're off school grounds,
Mhm.
somebody has to have approved it. And the other question I have, maybe for you, Kathleen, is, you know, third grade teacher at Broken Ground wants to take her kids out the door to go to the woods. She get the building's principal's approval on that before she goes? Or doesn't she?
Oh, yeah. You're doing any of that.
Okay.
She informs the principal there.
And it has to be using the school field trip approval form supposedly. You know?
We're not
So, I mean,
using the field trip approval form.
Right,
yeah.
because
they're
it's
not-
an
they're not gonna-
excursion,
They're
not
not
a
gonna
field
do
trip.
that, so, and I, you know, it's,
That'll be part
it's-
of their list at Broken Ground, that there will be occasions when the kids go out on the walking paths.
okay, I just,
And same with Millbrook, because they both do it.
it's just the lawyer in me,
I
I'm,
can tell.
you know,
Mhm.
trying to protect us from
Yep.
the lawyer on the other side.
Well, and that's why we create this field trips policy in the first place, right? We're trying to make sure that
Hopefully.
everyone is
Knows what's happening
accountable
with their
and knows
kids
what's
during the
going
day.
on,
Yeah.
and that way that no one can say, I didn't know my child was doing this and I have a legal issue.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that we would work through the legal arguments of any departure from school
Do
property.
you agree, Karen? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
and
an
I even
issue.
called Primex on this because I honestly had the exact same reaction you did. And, you know, because I said, we don't have an indemnification or waiver of liability. And their response, their risk analysis department said, yeah, they're really not worth the paper they're written on, and you guys are covered under other insurance, so we're less concerned about that.
Okay.
So I felt better about that. But my initial reaction about, you know, car jumping a curve or a dog biting a kid, or we have so many dual custody parents that, you know, one parent knows the kid is off school, but the other one forgets to tell them. It's fraught with issues, but I think this is the best way to try and address what a formal trip is. I like your comment about, okay, a field trip, and I think it is tied to the academic piece, and then occasionally the walking stuff. I think we have to put it back on the administrators at the schools to say, if you don't want your child to do it, you have to opt out.
Yeah, and I want it listed on, at the beginning of the year when they put that list together.
How about we add a sentence that at the beginning of the school year, parents should be provided a list of potential field trips and walking excursions, and be given an opportunity to sign a general permission form. No child may leave school grounds on a field trip or a walking excursion unless some form of written permission has been granted. So we put it in the policy.
Right,
that
we
they
create
have-
that notification piece.
that they have to send in, you know, they can send an annual permission slip, but they have to list the trips. And that if a trip is added, a separate permission.
Well, the only thing about that, Pam, is that I hope that we're not gonna be so specific that the teacher has to say, we're gonna go look at architecture.
No,
Or that we're gonna take some walks in the woods. I hope that all they have to say is occasional excursions off school grounds led by the teacher for walks, exercise.
I think that,
You know.
we're gonna go to White Farm for seed, we're gonna go to the apple picking, and we may take occasional walks off school grounds. Is what would satisfy me. But, if we wanted to put it in the policy that they can do an annual permission slip and that they should be sent a list of possible trips in the beginning.
So I'm trying to capture what you just said. So I said parents would be provided at the start of the school year a list of excursions off school grounds as well as field trips throughout the year.
And we could say types of excursions.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's
Mhm.
like potential types of excursions.
Yeah.
It's like,
Say that again.
it's like potential types of excursions,
A list of potential field trips.
walks in
and
the
types
woods,
of excursions.
walks to parks.
Mhm. It gives the parents, because the last time we had this conversation, I think we were really worried about having to opt in every time, and I like this because this is more of a notification with an opt out. So it informs the parents, it gives them a chance to opt out. Like, say my child is deathly allergic to apples, and so she cannot go to the apple picking, so just letting you know now, thanks for keeping me updated. It happens early, and then, there's no surprises. And then if anything gets added to the list, I'm sure one of the many apps that we use could be utilized to update people.
One more time, parents will provide at the start of the school year a list
Of potential field
potential-
trips and a description of types of excursions.
and a description of the types of excursions, okay.
Yeah.
Off school.
And be
trips.
given the opportunity to sign a general permission form.
Well, I think if you asked to sign a
Or,
permission
yes.
form or opt out. Yeah. So,
But,
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
think
we
that's
have
probably about the best
notification
we
of
can do.
excursions, we have letting the parents have opt-out possibilities. It's in the policy, but we're also allowing the administration to kind of create their own school field trip approval form that we assume is consistent.
Oh, we have a
district-wide.
consistent form
Okay.
when you go on a field trip.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that they all have to do.
Okay.
That's all standard across the district.
Perfect.
We also developed for them, Karen did, she did a great job. She gave them a list of all the things to make sure, like a checklist, but it's not part of the policy.
Right.
But all, like, check with the nurse, check with food service,
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
You have permission slips, you have the money, all that.
Yeah.
So we kind of did, just to give them a little checklist about, because we do worry about kids off campus.
Okay, so the question is, do we need to see this again before we,
I had
Send
one
it.
other
Okay, I'm
question.
sorry.
I'm sorry. We crossed out a student grade for,
Mhm.
and it said a student will not be negatively affected.
Right.
What was the thought behind crossing out grades?
It's everything. We don't want them affected negatively in attendance, in, school spirit, nothing. It's not
But
just about
that's
grades.
not realistic. I mean, if a kid doesn't get to go on a field trip that all the other classmates are going on, they may feel negatively affected. I mean, the thing we can control is their grades
Right.
and that they won't lose out in that area, but like to say that they won't be negatively affected sounds a little too optimistic for me.
I actually circled that as well, just because I feel like that the only thing we're required to address is that as a district, we're not going to dock their grades for not attending a field trip. But in terms of So like what other things would it be? Attendance record?
I suppose it could be attendance or,
But we expect them to go to the school that day, so what if they don't come? Would their attendance record not be affected? If they don't go on the field trip and they don't come to school?
We've had parents who say, I want my child on a field trip, I've elected to keep them home.
but if they're at school, then we put them in an educational program where
Yeah,
they're
if they're in
supervised.
school, But we do have parents that do that say they're not home school that day. Their teacher's not there.
So we could say a student's grades or attendance record will
Right.
not be negatively affected.
We could add that. More
If we wanted to,
descriptive. Yeah.
if that was our other concern. But I worry about like a broad,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's just an impossible
Yeah, it becomes ambiguous. Like, what does that mean to be negatively affected?
I mean, do we not mark a kid absent if they don't go to the field trip and they?
Well, if they don't show up at school that day, we have no reason to get a call from the parent and they mark absent.
So if we put attendance record in there, we would be changing that.
Maybe we'd be better off by just leaving grades in.
I'm okay with that.
Okay,
Okay.
that's good.
Not just grades, got it.
Do you think you have the changes?
I hope so.
Okay. I will move policy 694 as amended, that we recommended to the board for first reading at our December meeting.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous.
Okay. It's amended.
Okay, I guess we're moving on to policy 592.
Okie dokie. So 3-0. Okay.
On educational questionnaires, surveys, and research.
Yep, so we spent a little bit of time on this last time as well, and basically the takeaway was that I had taken the older policy, which you have, the one that's in existence, and then I had looked at the New Hampshire School Board Association model, and what Will Phillips tried to do in his policy write-up was put in, and it wasn't very, it was a lot of long and involved, but what he tried to do was make sure that both the state and the federal regulations were addressed. And so in the end, the committee felt that our older version was better than what they were anticipating, and so they asked me if I thought that it met all of the legal requirements, so I asked to go ahead and look at it and come back to them tonight, to you all tonight. And so I did include, just like in the last one, anything that's been, changed, like this policy instead will apply. I got rid of will and just applies, and then the red is the new language. I think it is important because not only do we have the RSA that pertains to obviously New Hampshire law, but we also have the Federal Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. Many of the things that we have to notice parents on with regard to their kids for questionnaires or surveys, there is some overlap between what state and federal law says. For example, for the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, you have to say political affiliations, and then they talk about legally recognized privileged relationships, and so there are a few additional things in the federal law that are not in the state law. So that's what those the red pertains to. And then with regard to the second to the on page 1, the second to the last paragraph, there's also some exemptions other than if it's tied to any kind of federal funding, either in the administration of the test, or otherwise, then there's a requirement that we have to notify. But there are the exceptions, and those are listed there. I would agree in advance that, I'm just going to say in advance, I think the way the paragraphs run on a little bit is bothersome. I don't like that. So what we can do is, in the original go-by, they had listed them out. For example, in the third paragraph where you have the list there of, the fourth paragraph under federal law where it starts talking about political affiliations, mental or psychological problems, blah, blah, blah. If you wanted to, we could go back to the format. I wanted to get the buy-in from the group before I did it and list it more as a bullet format. Same thing with the exemptions, if you like that better. Otherwise, I will do my very best to break up when the third and fourth paragraphs, so they're very long. So,
They are very long.
yeah.
Well, on paragraph 3, the non-academic surveys must have the approval of the superintendent. That's a separate thought.
Yep.
So that deserves its own paragraph. That is not actually related to the content, really, of the other.
Okay, we'll drop that down.
So, I feel like 3 and 4 are saying the same, like, 4 is just saying it in a longer fashion and giving lots of examples, but paragraph 3 says written permission is required for a non-educational survey or questionnaire that does not ask information directly related to a student's academics.
Right.
And then paragraph 4 is just a list of all those types, a whole sort of examples of what that might include, and I feel like we could get rid of that. We have said that in paragraph 3. We're just
Or should we just reference?
extending on it.
we
Well,
just-
they're specifically listed under the US Code, to just notice, again, it's the education piece of the things that are tied to, if they're tied to funding. So I think that's why they included them. And they're, as I said, they are a little bit different from what we put notices on under state law.
But what paragraph 3 says is written permission is required for any non-academic survey.
Right.
So I don't feel like we have to repeat that in paragraph 4. These are just examples of non-academic surveys.
The subject matters
Well,
of
but
some
it's
of them, but they're
concerning
pretty,
things. I mean,
they're almost protected classes in some cases.
yeah, I think they are.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
I guess my question on it is do we have to list all of this, or can we just reference the US Code provision?
yeah,
Could do that.
I'm okay with just reference, I mean.
I mean,
I think we did,
I-
though. Didn't we in the back?
we
Yeah, it is-
reference
it
them,
is
but I
about-
mean,
Yeah.
Listed it.
for here, we could say concerning matters, or concerning issues covered by, 20 USC 1232.
I would say this is I appreciate that we should keep these things short and concise. I do think if I'm a parent who isn't comfortable with the law, that thinking to go to the end of this policy to locate 20 USC Sec 12132 Pren H is something I'm reasonably going to do. And so in this particular instance, I find listing them specifically to be helpful to a parent or citizen who's trying to understand the policy.
Yeah, there is that argument.
Yeah, I just feel like it's these are just examples of non-academic
Mhm.
surveys.
Does it
And-
follow it follows the text of the federal code?
Yeah.
We're just mirroring it, right? Or
And I think we're saying our policy is that we're following state and federal law
mhm.
with the additional requirement that the superintendent has to approve. I would actually move up into paragraph 3
Mhm.
after, the parents will be notified at least 10 days prior, so that it's more, partly I think it just, it suggests, when I read this, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, we're gonna be doing surveys on legally recognized privileged relationships and, all of these stuff, like we're gonna be asking kids about their relationships with their
Mhm.
ministers and the lawyers, and that's not what our and so I feel like just having all of that actually raises more concerns. I would just rather be clear that we're following the federal law, that parents will have to give permission, and they can see it if they want to see it.
Mhm.
Well, we're even required to post the surveys on our websites.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
think telling parents to go do their own research isn't gonna buy the day here. And if we do ask a sensitive question of one of the parents' kids, and the parent doesn't see it listed, I can see them saying, why are you going there? And we say, well, we told you in the federal law we were gonna do it. I think sometimes just being transparent, we have more coverage for, in instances where we can say, that question really falls into what's prohibited here as a non-academic survey. I just think it does inform better. I'll be honest, I don't like the way it's, spelled out. So this is what the older one looks like. I know you guys can't see it from afar, but it's that one I showed you last
Yeah.
week. But it has more of a bullet list, bing, bing, bing. It's not long and
Well, whether it's bulleted or not,
Right.
it's a lot.
that's a lot.
I mean, it's no longer than there's a paragraph in the current policy that's just as long.
Yeah.
We don't shy away from run-on sentences
Yeah,
here.
well,
No. Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
Oh man. Well.
I mean, what we talked about at the last time was, like, we were generally comfortable with the current policy, but we'd like to add the permission of the superintendent. And so, was what our consensus was the last time. This just took the stuff that we said we didn't want in it and stuck it in one long paragraph instead of having it in a bullet form.
Right. Except for we're noticing them of what the federal law is.
That's exactly what you did. I mean, we had this exact discussion
Federal
in the
law.
last meeting,
Right.
and it's just being presented in a different format.
Well, you asked me to go back and decide what is required by law. You said go back and take a look at the statute.
It is a little.
This
It is a
that-
little
we didn't
shorter.
ask what's required by law to be in the policy,
Right.
not, it just federal or
I
state law
think-
require us
I-
to list all this in a policy.
Well, they don't say list it in your
I'm
policy.
sure it doesn't. I mean, again, you could say, federal law exempts things as listed in 20 USC 1232. But the question, to Kara's point, is do we owe it to whoever the poor person is that actually looks up this policy to list all these things out, or do we tell them to go find the US code?
This policy is not, this policy is not only important for our families, but also for our teachers.
Well,
They need to
then we need to list the stuff out, and it's long and run on, and so be it.
I think this makes the policy harder to understand, and people have less of, it varies what rights parents do have, which is to consent, to see the survey. I think we can say we're following applicable state and federal laws. We could link to the federal law on our, provide a hyperlink in the policy. I'd be fine with that. I just think this just makes it very.
Or just another thought, Pam, I mean, the other thing that we could do would be to say, information concerning the matters listed on Schedule A, and you list all those things. And then, federal law exempts from consent and notice all these things, Schedule B. I mean, it'd make the policy itself shorter, but it would still give somebody who wanted to have them all listed, the list. I don't know.
Well, and I'm not sure that some of the things in the second list are actually non-academic surveys, like, I don't think book fairs are a non-academic survey. And diagnostic clinical aptitude are academic.
Well, I mean, are you saying that you disagree with
gonna say the
the
law's the
federal
law.
law?
No, I'm just saying, I feel like
Well, these things, I mean,
a shorter and simpler policy.
but Karen, you took all these things right out of it.
Yeah, I have the
The
code
law.
if you want to see it. It's word for word.
I believe it's the code. I guess my question is, do we have to take the
Provide it.
federal code and put it in our policies? Because if we start doing that on every single policy,
We're gonna have really long policies.
we're gonna have really long, incomprehensible policies. And I just don't, I feel like to say we're, and then we will have to change them constantly because
Policy changes.
the federal and state laws change constantly.
Cara, how do you feel about the link idea?
Yeah, I was gonna.
The link,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Under where it said, whatever the first line in what, under federal protection, right, blah, blah, blah. We put a link there,
Mhm.
rather than have all of this, and if you need to know what the specifics are, you can hit that and just.
Yeah.
So it isn't like, I've gotta figure out what thing in the
Right.
back, like you said, like, 20C.
Right, to know to look,
Yeah.
because if we don't
Yeah.
mention it at all.
What if you're not looking at this policy
All
on
the time.
on a
Yeah.
computer?
And we tried that.
Well, the citation's still there, right?
Yeah, the
which-
citation's still there if you're not on a computer.
Okay. True.
All of our policies are, that we don't have any, we're not doing hard copies anymore.
No, but somebody could go in and print
They
it
could
off,
request it.
Yeah.
or request
Yeah.
it, or
Yeah.
they,
They
keep in mind,
download it.
not everybody's got a computer, so.
But we're not, we haven't linked any other stuff in other policies because I was told it was just too hard to keep up with it all.
To do all the links.
But that
Yeah.
seems like an argument for not putting
More text in.
statutes word for word in policies.
Which
I
goes,
think-
which goes back to the thought of,
Just
let's
say we,
put in 20 USC 1232H
which we do at the
and
bottom.
leave it at a day. Well, but no, we could actually list it here as
Yeah.
well, as, instead of having people refer to the legal references, you can just say, as listed in,
Or we could refer to the people, several state and federal and state laws, including the Protection of People Rights Amendment under separate state and federal laws, including the federal People Rights Amendment. Prior parental permission or guardian written consent is required if a non-academic survey analysis with evaluation or its administration.
Ends after Department of Education.
Yeah, I was actually gonna skip that part.
Right.
Written consent must be obtained from a parent or guardian before a student participates in a non-educational survey or questionnaire that asks information not directly related to the student's academics, unless the student is an adult or an emancipated minor. And then non-academic surveys do not include. And then a new paragraph for the
I don't
superintendent.
know what you're doing, but I'm confused, so.
Yeah, I'm-
So
I'm a
I'm
little
taking
confused now.
paragraph
Hold on.
3,
Right, which paragraph?
paragraph 3,
Yeah, which begins with separate.
yeah, and changing it to under separate federal and state laws, including the Federal Protection of People Rights Amendment,
So-
comma,
So we're taking the preposition from 4 and removing it up to
Yeah.
the first sentence in 3. So we're,
written permission must be obtained from a parent or guardian before a student participates in a non-educational survey or questionnaire that asks about information not directly related to student's academics, unless the student is an adult or an emancipated minor,
period.
period.
One more time.
Under separate federal and state laws, including the Federal Protection of People Rights Amendment, written consent must be obtained from a parent or guardian before a student participates in a non-educational survey or questionnaire that asks about discrimination not directly related to a student's academics, comma, unless the student is an adult or an emancipated minor, period.
And the rest of it, with the exception of the superintendent's,
Which should be a
which should
new
be a
paragraph.
separate paragraph, and I have that.
But
I just don't wanna miss.
But then I would move up until under, to a new paragraph for, or maybe parents and guardians will be notified at least 10 calendar days prior to the school administrating.
Yep.
That paragraph. Superintendent permission, then we don't have to do it for the YBS.
Right, that's.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Another question I have is whether state and federal ought to be capitalized, but I guess we've gone down that road several times before.
Oh, you mean
We don't
before,
have our
right before
subcommittee form, yeah.
federal protection of, yeah, I looked it up, no, it's not. Federal
not.
isn't, believe it or not, or
Okay.
state, it's just the act itself, or amendment itself.
It's usually in quotes, though, isn't it?
I-
The amendment, the,
So you don't, so if I understand this correctly, you really want to, other than the language that got moved up for the Federal Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, you want to delete everything else in what is now paragraph 4 and paragraph 5,
I do, I don't.
I think so, yeah.
okay? And then you want
I
to
feel
move
like
up-
as long as it is very clear that someone can find that information quickly, either in an appendix or a citation, however we decide. Or even just.
Well, for example, under the Federal Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment,
found at 20 U.S. Code.
yeah, I was gonna say, parentheses, 20 USC. um, What are people's thoughts on whether we want to see this again before we send it forward? What do you think, Pam?
I would be okay if we just send it.
I guess we could send it for a first
We can
read.
send it for first, and then other board members will be like, why aren't there more lists? Send it back to committee. So,
Okay.
I'll
Um,
move policy 592 is amended, be recommended to the board for a first reading at our December meeting.
seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All clear as mud now at this point? All right.
Okay.
All right, 4:30, restraint and conclusion.
So the only thing we were gonna do with
Seclusion.
4:30 tonight was, I was gonna give it to you along with just a brief, this is going to be, the only thing for the next meeting. It is restraint and seclusion. It is a very, well, how do I say this? It's had a huge overhaul. Both the RSA 126U and then in the definition section, they defined seclusion. They added some words to the restraint. There are specific conditions under which seclusion can be used, other examples where it's forbidden. There's now a requirement that we have a co-regulator if we have a student who's being secluded. At a 15-minute period, then a second authorized person has to come in and make sure that everything's okay, that the student is well and doing okay, and then again at 30 minutes, they have done away and made prone restraint, other than in a transition period, like if the student is standing and then is taken down to the ground and put in a prone position, that's okay as long as you're only transitioning to then maybe a sitting position. It's going to be a very specific and detailed policy. I have asked, before I move on, IEPs and 504s for students who have those. If there's one incident of physical restraint or seclusion, it now is a requirement that with a parent request or otherwise, the school has to hold an IEP meeting to make adjustments, even after the first incident, and then if there are continued incidents. So what we'd like to do is give this to you tonight. It's got a lot of markups in it. It has does not have the exact formatting because the paragraphs and everything else, if you can forgive me on the formatting piece, we can get to the formatting. Yeah, just look at the substance if you can. So you have
Looking
the
right at me,
old,
Kathleen.
you have the old and you have the new. And then I thought, if good with you all, we'll bring John Fabrizio in, who's our Director of Student Services, because we've both been to legal conferences on this, and it is a very, as I said, very detailed, specific document, and he can explain the whys and wherefores.
Has anybody come out at the state level with a sample?
This is the sample
This
policy.
is the policy?
This is a sample from New Hampshire School Board Association.
Okay.
We also met with our general counsel, and we have provisions in here from them. I tailored it again with John Fabrizio to what we actually do in our district. And so there's a lot of information there, but I suspect this will be a fairly contentious policy.
I would love to hear from some teachers and principals as part of the discussions about this policy.
Yeah, I mean, this policy will be in effect really for our 3 operating units, pretty much some folks that deal with that every day. We also got a technical advisory from the
Two of them,
Department of Ed,
yeah.
from Attorney Fenton over at the DOE, so I will share that with you too. I think you should see her, but boy, I'll tell you, it's every time you go to a meeting, you discuss it, you get a little bit of a different twist to it, how it's interpreted, so I think it's gonna be one that's gonna require a little bit of time on this. We'll go slow with it. There's nothing else really on the horizon that's really demanding in terms of policies. We're in good places, updated in terms of new legislation. Of course, that new legislation is around the corner. Based on the number of bills that I've heard you submitted, it's outrageous, but we probably have more things after the legislative session. But this one's gonna be long,
Just
tedious.
in looking at this, and, I understand we're not gonna do anything at the moment, but I'm just wondering if, again, like we just did with our last policy, if there's a way to reference things as opposed to necessarily having to put them
Yeah,
into
we
the
tried to
policy.
do that in some of them, like restraint period exceeding 15 minutes. We tried to include the RSA that talks about it, so you could go to that. We use that more as the defining, like, to define the terms and to define what was required. So, we'll go back and look at it again.
No,
So
Our
aside from,
principals have seen this once already. We'll bring it back to the next meeting again, so they can see it, and give us some input.
I just get nervous when I see 9-page policies.
yeah, it's very
It's
detailed.
like-
I mean, this
Is-
one has a lot
It's like,
of meat to it, yeah.
a couple of policies that you have, your pupil protect violence and protection of anti-bullying law is like that too. It's multiple pages.
Yeah, the procedural requirements in this, in the documentation, reports, the notification of parents, as you can imagine, you read this and you think, oh, it'll bother you a little bit when you read it. It just does. But is there anybody else
Our
other than?
current policy is,
It's
6
also long.
pages.
is a similar length.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
it's also long, so.
So,
I-
is there
I get it.
anybody else besides a parent, or excuse me, a principal, a student? I'm gonna have John Fabrizio. Is there anybody else you all wanna hear from so we can get them here?
Medical staff, if we're talking about medication.
I don't know that we do.
I don't know, do we think we need a student here?
Who?
A student? I don't think we need
It's probably mostly elementary,
I don't think we need a student.
middle.
Yeah.
We only do it at the high school, because we have a 3-hour program. But it's the little ones that restrict.
Yeah.
I think John.
You've got to understand, I've said this about Crystal McCullough, it's a good example. They might have to restrain a little one who's ready to dart because they're going out the door. And when you go out the door at Crystal McCullough, you're on a main street and that school's surrounded by those, highly trafficked areas. So you'll see a higher number. And unfortunately, at Krista, although they don't have a 3-hour program, with
The
little ones,
kindergarten door goes right, the kindergartners are right next to the exit.
and,
A special
you know, they
policy
wanna
just for
go
them.
And they wanna go home to see mom or something, and they are fast, so. I know Chris, principal, Mrs. Gallo, has had her fair share of, but that does happen.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily related to an IEP or 504. That's
Sure.
what I wanted to let you know.
Right,
Sure.
right, yeah,
It's just, you know, open so that they won't
sure.
run out the street.
I think John will be able to, on the medication piece, Cara,
Yeah.
address if we
Yeah.
even have a student that meets that. I don't know
Most
that we
of the
do.
time, the medication piece occurs, you know, in a hospital setting
Mhm.
or an institutional setting where they administer medication. And there's even pretty strict laws with institutions around the medication and restraints and, you know, straps and so forth. So even that one is, I mean, we're not giving medication to quiet someone down, but it is part of the definition.
Right, it is
So
there.
without people-
Yeah, I think people will have questions once we start
Yeah,
talking
we're
about
not
it publicly.
giving medication
This is so loud.
involuntarily to control students' behavior. Now,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that students don't have medication, they do.
Right.
We don't use it to control when they're not regulated.
Mhm.
And I just one more thing, lots of things will spur some dysregulation. I'm gonna give you a couple of examples, like lights that blink and flash. Sometimes when we do fire alarms, lockdowns, we had kids who just really struggle with it. And so, you know, we've had to hold them because they're dysregulated because of those stimuli.
Yeah.
I do have a couple food for thought questions before we meet again. In reading it, in the definition of restraint, it's limited to school and facility staff members, contractors, or otherwise under the control and direction of a school or facility.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, in page 1, in
Yep.
the definitions of restraint.
Yep.
It is limited to actions taken by persons who are school or facility staff members, contractors, or otherwise under the control or direction of a school or facility.
Yep.
So it has like a group of people that it applies to in terms of who can
Correct.
restrain. On page 3, Rome 2, under training required, it says restraint may only be used or implemented by trained school staff. So I just wanted to make sure that we're thinking about who's going to be.
We'll share that with you.
Mhm.
When we use the Bill White program and we use those behavioral.
Mhm.
Contractors.
Those are trained.
Mhm.
So like we're not providing the CPI training and staff. We're looking into all the
Yeah.
details.
Part of it is that you're identifying a broader group
Right.
Yeah.
in the beginning and then.
And then
just
and
as
then
school
narrowing
staff,
it. Yeah. So like in my mind, I'm like, who does this apply to? Does it apply? You know. So having there seems to be a more broad and then a
All
more.
those folks can do it.
Yeah.
But we are responsible for making sure that our school staff are trained.
Mhm.
Because we do have, as you know, outside consultants that
Mhm.
they do
How-
training.
The contract.
How are school resource officers covered in this, if at all?
We normally they're not involved at all. The high school may have.
With restraint?
To do restraint at the high school. And they may be called in by the administration, but nowhere else.
We don't have one yet.
Yeah, I know.
Well, maybe we need to include the school resource officer or the principal discuss how.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just.
Are always involved in restraint.
When I'm thinking of the definition that you were just talking about, I mean, school or facility staff members, contractors, or otherwise under the control or direction of a school or facility. I don't know whether a resource officer is,
An employee. We have a contract with them, but technically they're not. the school.
they work for the police department.
Right.
And they're not under school control, I don't think.
Yes, they are. They are under the direction of the school principal when they're there.
Okay.
So
Okay,
It
so-
is-
so
I
they would be
find a
covered?
relationship.
Yeah,
Yes, they
all
would,
right.
the Concord PD, while they're there, they are under
Okay.
direction.
Yeah, we do
That's-
have an MOU, I can,
So
if
we'll,
you want to see it.
That's fine, but I just want to make sure that they are covered somehow,
Yep.
you know?
Right.
But I would also
because they
like,
do it when there's
Right.
a student that's.
That's
it's
kind of what they're there for.
see it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would also like them, I'd like to have a deeper understanding, especially like, are they required to undergo the same training and use the same parameters around restraint as
Right.
our employees and contractors? And, short of an arrest, and I suspect no, because I've heard stories about, students who have needed transportation to a mental health facility and the SRO being involved in that. And so I think maybe we just want to have that conversation.
Yeah. I know, I
Yeah.
would love a deeper understanding of what training entails as well, you know.
Well, we can do that too, because, we have
Michelle Speckman.
folks, Michelle Speckman,
Mhm.
as an example, does a lot of that training. We have kind of the trainer model.
Right. I think it just, in terms of creating policy, I want to be
Yeah,
as,
well, we'll
to know as
folks
much as I
to help
can,
you.
yeah. That would be great.
All right.
All right. So, more to
Just
come.
for future, I think Mr. Richards sent this around, but I certainly concur. If we do not have a policy on how early dismissals are handled, especially early dismissals in emergencies, I think we need one. I don't know the answer to the question of like whether every parent was at a bus stop, and what happens if the notice went out that the bus drivers would be looking for adults. I don't know if that meant my adult or just an adult at the bus stop, or if there had to be, and what happens if no one's home for a walker, like where are we transporting kids if their school is not able, are we just sending them home? We had this question with Runlet last year, and that's a little easier, I think, they're a little older, but I especially with the younger grades at Abbott Downing, I think it behooves us to sort of look and make sure
Yeah, I agree.
we have a good policy in place and strong standards. I mean,
Yeah, it's
just
got to be more than just
the
Parent
extent
Square.
that Runlet parents got a text and Abbott Downing parents did not.
Yeah,
So that if they were not on Parent Square or checking if they don't have push notifications on Parent Square, which I don't, or if they weren't checking their email, they didn't know.
Yeah, I think it would be excellent to be involved in a debrief, just so that we can help parents feel better about what went down. And then I agree that if there is a way that we can create structure through policy that is helpful to all of our principals, have a consistent pathway for emergencies, non-emergency emergencies, early dismissals, et cetera.
But I don't want us sending elementary school students home without a parent acknowledging that they will be there.
Mhm.
And I think we need a backup plan if,
I know. I was thinking, because we were
They go
home,
to
so
the
I was like, they can
Christopher
come to my
Collins
house. I'm
thing,
like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
How do I tell everybody to come to my house? We're just down the street,
You
but
know.
yeah.
yeah.
Yep, I agree. It was a tense morning for a lot of parents. And I'm glad the water main is fixed so quickly. I can't tell you how disappointed Evelyn was that it was fixed so quickly. She was like, we're not going to have school for the rest of the week. I'm like, no. You're going back tomorrow, bud. So I'm glad everybody was okay.
All right, anything else for the good of the order? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
second?
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. I'd wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, but I'll see you all on Monday night.